Hello everybody, my name is Sanket and today I'm going to demonstrate to test ActiveMQ with SoapUI Pro. We are going to do this in essentially 3 steps. First step is to download and configure ActiveMQ. We are keeping the configuration extremely basic, so we'll not spend much time there. In the second step, which is download and configuring Hermes JMS, downloading Hermes JMS could be optional to you if you are working with SoapUI Pro. SoapUI Pro also has Hermes JMS shipped along with the package, hence you may not require to download it. Otherwise, if you do not have the download with you, you can always download it from the SmartBear website or look for Hermes JMS on internet. Now, the third step would be consuming the Hermes JMS sessions and sending a request to the queue and also looking at the response back. Okay, so what I have opened in my screen for step 1 is Apache ActiveMQ web page. You will have to navigate to the download section and look at the latest release. At the time of making this video, the latest release for ActiveMQ is 5.15.3, and since I'm working on a Windows virtual machine, I'm going to use the Windows distribution. So once I have these files downloaded, which I have already done, I have put them in my C drive programs folder. So you can as well keep these files in your desired location. However, before we get into starting the service, just ensure that you have Java installed in your systems. Now, since my machine is Windows 32-bit, I have also installed Java 32-bit there. And once I navigate into the bin folder to launch my service, I will have to use the Windows 32 version. However, if you guys have, say you are working on a Windows 64-bit machine and you have Java 64-bit installed as well, then it makes sense that you look at Windows 64 directory here. Okay, otherwise the workflow is still going to remain the same. Hence I'm going to continue using Win32 ActiveMQ version. So I'm going to launch the command prompt window in here, and I'm already in C drive programs Apache ActiveMQ folder within that bin and Win32 directory. Now to launch the MQ service, I have to type in command ActiveMQ, and you could see that even while I'm using the VM, the service has kicked off pretty much at speed. Now there is also a web console available for ActiveMQ for us to work with. However, you can see that it has started with a message saying the web console is available at http 0.0.0.0. So I would prefer using my real IP instead of localhost, or using the loopback IP address such as 127.0.0.1. I would get the real IP of my system. So I go to command prompt again, I type in ipconfig, and I get the 192.168.1.79 IP address of my system. So once I have this IP address, I navigate to the web console, add in the port number 8161, and I am in the ActiveMQ broker page. Now, when I select manage ActiveMQ broker, it ideally throws in an authentication prompt for me where I have to put in my username as admin, password admin. Okay, so admin in lowercase. So you can also find this information on the Apache site as well. Now once I have logged in, I'm presented with information such as name, version, and the ID of the broker. However, our interest will be on the queues. You can see that the queues are empty in here, or there are no queues listed. This is because this is an extremely fresh installation of the ActiveMQ service. As you see that we send a request and get a response back, you'll see that there are queues populating within this ActiveMQ web console. A good thing about Apache ActiveMQ is, or rather good things about Apache ActiveMQ is it's open source, it's pretty lightweight, and when you send a message to a queue which does not exist, it automatically brings up the queue name for you in the web console. Okay. So that's pretty much on the MQ configuration. Now I would like to move to Ready API. Now, as I mentioned before, within Ready API or says within SoapUI Pro, you have Hermes JMS package shipped along with it. So to verify that, I look at File, Preferences, and look at Tools. This is where I can see that Hermes JMS is listed for me here. If this is not available for you by any chance, you will have to download Hermes JMS manually. Okay. And since this is listed for me, I'm simply going to move ahead. And if I had to launch Hermes JMS, I'll have to look at Tools, Hermes JMS. Okay, it takes a while for the console to come up. And once the console is up there, you can see there is a JMS folder within, and then there is this session subfolder. So I'm not going to consume anything which is there by default, which is the file session. Instead, I am going to create a new session here. So I would say new session. I'm going to give the session name. I'm going to call it ActiveMQ. I'm going to remove the default destinations provided in here, and I say apply and save. Now you can see that ActiveMQ is available as a session for me here. I further click on edit. Now I have to configure the provider. Configuring provider is pretty simple. You basically have to give it a name, or rather say add group. Right click and say add group. I give the group name same as the latest version of Apache MQ. So in this case, ActiveMQ 5.15.3. Copy this, go back to Hermes JMS, copy paste in here and say okay. Now within the library, I need to configure the right jars. Right click again, say add jars, go to PC, C drive, programs, Apache ActiveMQ folder. So this folder is by my choice, which is C drive programs. You could have this directly listed elsewhere, which is totally fine. Just ensure that you are within the Apache ActiveMQ directory. So I add the first jar, which is ActiveMQ, all with the latest version number mentioned there, .jar. And once I select it, Hermes will prompt saying, do you want to scan this for JMS connection factories? We say scan, no harm there, and say apply. Now once this is done, I also have to add another jar there. Again, select the library, right click, say add jar, go to the Apache ActiveMQ folder. Now I navigate within the lib folder and I have to look for Geronimo J2EE management 1.1 spec jar. I select open, scan this again, and now I select apply and then OK. Now once I selected OK, my basic provider is configured for this MQ. Again, I do a right click, edit, I verify that the provider still exists, and within the preferences, I first have to change the loader from system to ActiveMQ. Now once I have done this, I also need now to change the connection factory from Hermes null connection factory to org.apache.activemq ActiveMQ connection factory. Right. And next, from within the plugin, I change this from default to ActiveMQ. Now we start adding properties in here. The first property is the broker name, which is essentially the IP address of your system where the MQ is configured. In my case, it is 192.168.1.179. Again, remember, this is a local IP, and since it is hosted in my system, you could have this hosted elsewhere also. Now, the second property that I add in here is service URL. Now this value, I have taken this from the Smart Bear web page. So I have the link listed here. However, this link might change over time. So just remember, you need to get this value from the support page of Smart Bear within the properties section. Okay, so once I scroll down here, I can look for the value for the service. Just copy this. This value is listed as localhost in here. Remember to put in your real IP instead of the localhost. Okay, so I put in, paste this value instead of localhost. I now change this to 192.168.1.179. And also I now add a property within the connection factory. Say add property, look for broker URL, select B again, and here the value that I need to specify is TCP:// IP number 192.168.1.179 with port number 61616, which is configured as default. Okay, so once this setting is done, I select apply and then OK. Now once this is done, I also can define queues in here. To define queues, what I do is select the ActiveMQ, which I created now, right click, say new, add queue. I'm going to give my queue a name. Let's say my test.in. This is my input queue. I copy this, paste this back as short name. I leave the domain as queue, select OK. I add another queue. In this case, this is my out queue, my test.out, short name as well, my test.out, and domain I leave it as queue. Okay, and right, so now that this is configured, I save my settings and I exit from Hermes JMS. Now we have reached the second step from what I initially displayed. We have completed configuration of the MQ, configuration of Hermes JMS. Now the only part which is left is to configure SoapUI Pro to consume the JMS, send a request to the MQ and receive a response back. To do that, this is little we'll have to play in a little trick here with SoapUI. So SoapUI, you cannot straight away add a JMS request. Instead, you will have to bind it to any existing request such as REST or SOAP. So what I do is I go to the SoapUI tab in here, file, import project. I'm going to import a default tutorial project which is shipped along with SoapUI, just so that I can bind this to my MQ. I don't know why they do that, but that's how it is. So I go within tutorials and I select sample soap project XML. Okay, so once I do this, it says, do you want to import it again? Maybe yes, I would have imported it last time. Let's say import project again, say okay. Now you can see that my project has been successfully imported. So I'm going to create a new test suite and not use any of these existing tests or test suite, rather create a new one, say new test suite, and I'm going to call it JMS test suite. Within this JMS test suite, I say new test case, and within this test case, I add a new step, which is the JMS request. Now, once I select OK, I also will have to bind this to one of this request within this SOAP, or let's see if you're using REST, you'll have to bind it something within REST. Now, this is something which we can take care of later. For now, just say OK and give it a name, JMS request, say yes, and it now prompts that do we have to start Hermes for JMS objects, say yes. Now Hermes again will take a while to launch. within the console, you can verify that our session which we created is already present. I just minimize this. Now there is still a prompt for us to select an existing JMS endpoint or create a new point. Now I am going to create a new point in here, and once I look at Hermes, this configuration is loaded for me. So when I saved this configuration file, I had saved it in C drive.hermes folder. I can show that to you. C drive.hermes folder. You can look that here. Your folder could be elsewhere, otherwise mostly Hermes defaults this to this particular location, which is C drive.hermes. So I select this, say select folder, this session that we created, which is ActiveMQ. To send, I have a queue listed in here, which is mytest.n, which is the queue that we created in Hermes, and to receive as well, I have a queue created, which is mytest.out. Now that I have specified all of this, I can look at the JMS request. So now a while back I told you that this request is binded to one of this existing test within my test suite. So I do not want to send any XML for this demonstration. Instead, I want to keep it extremely simple. Hence, I delete the XML. I may get some XML schema errors in here, but we are going to click OK and proceed further. Instead, I'm going to send a sample message and say, hi, I am from mytest.in queue. Hope the spelling is correct. That's right. Now, before I go ahead and submit this request, what I also want to show you is the queue page. So if I refresh this, you can see that there are no queues available here for us. And once we submit the request, you are going to see new queues being populated in here. So I go to Ready API again. I submit this request. As I mentioned before, it says the schema does not match, which is fine. I do not want to recreate the schema. I say no, and you can see our service has been sent. Now also you can see that this is under process. The progress bar is still running, which means that this is waiting for a response from the queue back. Now if I launch my console again and refresh this, you can see that there are two queues in here. One queue, first queue has some pending messages, and there are messages which are enqueued. So ideally in real time, your MQs are not going to be so simple, and the MQs are going to respond intelligently. However, in my case, I do not have any backend code running here to kind of churn the data, put in some more message in there and send a response automatically back. I'm going to simulate this step manually. Okay, so to simulate this manually, I browse the message, and just a second, again going back to queues, I'm going to browse the message. I select the message ID, and I have options to move this message from this particular queue to some other queue. Now before I say move, there is a prompt in here. I'm going to stop here for a while and look at my Ready API. You can see that it is still waiting for a response and the progress bar is still running. So now when I go back and say OK, we should see that the message is out of the queue. Instead, now when we look at the queues, any pending messages are 0. And when I look at my Ready API, you will see that I have got a response back from the server, which is essentially data, which is the same thing which I sent in here. And this data is sent. You can say for after about 106 milliseconds. This is because of lot of manual intervention. I can, if there was some code behind it where MQ processing is happening, you have a lot of server grade infrastructure, you ideally would complete this activity of reading from MQ, sending message back to MQ in couple of milliseconds. That's the SLA that you can look for when you are testing. Right, to make this demonstration more interesting, what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply delete this response which I have received in here, and I'm going to show you in real time uh, this exercise or this use case of sending a request and looking at the response from Ready API. Okay, so I'm going to minimize or rather resize my VM. This is perfect. And from here, I submit the request again. So I have a prompt saying recreate the default message. Let's ignore this, say no. And the message has been sent. Now when I refresh this, I can see that there is a message waiting for us. I can browse the message, look at the message, do the same exercise again of sending it from this queue. Now when I select OK, you should ideally see the message popping in here within Ready API. Okay, so now I'm going to select OK, and you can see the message has arrived. Okay, so this is a very basic use case, I understand, but I'm sure this gives you a good idea on configuring how to use JMS, how to use ActiveMQ, how to configure Hermes JMS, and what are the elements that you need to look at ActiveMQ installation when we are talking about testing ActiveMQs with Ready API. So if you like this video, leave a comment, or if you have any questions, you can as well put that in the comment section. Thank you very much.